Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan bagi kita semua. Halo Sobat Pelajar, perkenalkan aku Annursila dari Ramadhani dari Duta Pelajar Banten Batch 4 Delegasi Kota Tangerang. Pada kesempatan kali ini, aku akan menampilkan salah satu unjuk bakat, yaitu storytelling. So once upon a time, there was a nobleman who had a sweet wife and a daughter. But then, time flies and his wife died. And then he had married once again with his second wife, who was so horrible. She had two daughters whose bad tempers had given them ugly faces. They were so mean to her sister, Ella. Ella has to sweep all the cinders from the ground, so they called her Cinderella. And one day, the king's son sent out invitation to the grand hall of the palace, and the ugly sister was screamed so happily, and they spent forever. They spent ages to find what to wear, and Cinderella had to help them get dressed and brushes their hair. There was no question of Cinderella going to the ball in her rage. When the ugly sisters had left for the ball, Cinderella burst into tears. "How I wish I could go too," she cried. And suddenly, her fairy godmother appeared. "Oh, don't cry, child," she said. "Of course you can go to the ball. But first, we'll need a few bits and pieces. Get me 1 pumpkin, 6 little mice, 1 large rat, and 6 lizards." Well, Cinderella couldn't think how a pumpkin and some animals were going to get her to the ball. But she did as her godmother asked. Her fairy godmother waved her wand and whoosh! The pumpkin disappeared, and in its place stood a beautiful couch. Then she waved her wand again. The 6 little mice turned into a team of handsome carriage hopes. The rat was soon as rather a fat coachman, and the lizards became 6 footmen. So now Cinderella had a lovely coach to take her to the ball. But she was still in her rage. Her godmother smiled and tapped her once with her wand. And immediately, Cinderella was dressed in shimmering gold. "Now, off you go," said her godmother. "But remember, at midnight, everything will go back to the way it was, so you must go home before it then." Cinderella promised, then stepped into her beautiful coach, and the 6 white horses set off towards the king's palace. And everyone at the ball stopped dancing when the mysterious strangers arrived, because Cinderella looked so beautiful in her gold dress that everyone thought she was a princess from a foreign country. Even her 2 stepsisters was fooled. The prince was just as curious as everyone else. From the moment Cinderella came into the ballroom, he danced with no one else. But by the end of the evening, he was madly in love with his princess, and he didn't even know her name. And Cinderella was just as much in love with the prince. But as they were dancing, Cinderella suddenly heard the chimes of the palace clock. "Oh no!" she cried. "It must be midnight." Cinderella ran away from the prince, out of the ballroom and down the palace steps, losing one of her glass slippers along the way. But by the time she reached the bottom steps, the clock had finished striking 12, and Cinderella was enraged again. The prince ran after Cinderella, but all he found was a beautiful slipper from the steps. "Send out a proclamation," he said. I will marry the person whose foot fits this slipper. Will ask every woman in the kingdom to try on the slipper. So the prince went into every house in the kingdom, and soon he came to the house where Cinderella lived with her stepsisters. Of course, the ugly sisters were very eager to try their luck. But no matter how hard they pushed her big feet into the glass slipper, it didn't fit. So Cinderella came forward to try on the slipper. To the amazement of her stepsisters, it fit perfectly. The prince looked up at Cinderella's face and recognized the beautiful princess he had danced with. So he married Cinderella. And unlike the stepsisters, they lived happily ever after. Saya, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.